When we learn to speak in our first or native language, we learn to produce utterances that are sensible and effective before we learn the rules that control why they're effective or ineffective, why they're sensible or nonsensical, namely rhetoric and grammar. We go through a similar process when we learn to read images. We see pictures and we understand things about them before we're necessarily able to articulate why we get that message. We're going to demonstrate this concept by going through a book called Picture This by Molly Bang. It's about how picture books work, how they're visually composed, the rhetoric of them, but it's not a rhetoric unique to them. You'll actually see this kind of language in a lot of situations where you're interpreting a visual production. The first concept that Molly Bang introduces is that of stability. Here we have a triangle in a nice bright red. It's a very simple shape. It's a shape that is more likely in most languages to be named with sharp consonants, clicking consonants like Ks, which is an interesting effect called the Kiki Bauba effect, if you want to look that up to learn more. It's interestingly a appealing every shape because we can map emotions onto this very effectively. It's not leaning one way or the other. As an equilateral triangle, that is, we don't perceive it as having a facing direction. So this shape has a stability, a simplicity that makes it useful for storytelling. In this case, the story that's being built through simple shapes is, spoiler alert, Little Red Riding Hood. Now our protagonist shape is placed next to a similar shape that's larger in order to show relationship. The things that are the same about these two shapes, they're both red equilateral triangles, and the things that are different about this shape, their size and placement, give us messages about how they interact with each other. This left-hand triangle is larger. It's placed earlier on the page. So there's something about it that's perhaps more important, more dominant. What might that be? By changing the shape, we begin to suggest some of what the differences might be. We've still got a relationship in color. We've got a relationship in placement. They're on the page together. But this is a softer shape. This is the kind of shape that linguistically, most languages are going to name with consonants that are pronounced further forward in the mouth, like bauba or mama. Also longer, more open vowels, although the vowels seem to be a little less important than the consonants. So we've given this a rounder, softer shape. We've also given it a facing direction. The slight taper toward the top suggests a head, and the way that the top portion of the figure is leaning suggests a facing direction to us. Now we have Little Red Riding Hood, our pointy little every shape, and her mother. There's still something off about the image, though. So next we change color. Here we've got a nice blue-violet color on the mother shape. It's got all kinds of connotative associations with water, with the sky, with calm, with peace. We could go more culturally specific and say this kind of blue, purple, blurple is associated with depictions of Mary, the Virgin Mary within Christianity. We can also just say that this red is a much more alarming, exciting color, and the blue is a much softer, more stable color. So now we still have relationship in this hierarchy of scale and in the fact that they're placed on the same horizon line, but we're focusing more on the differences between the two figures: shape, color. The placement also has something to do with this, of course. One figure is here on the left, one is here on the right, and there's a reason for that. If you read a left to right language, like English, the right side of the page is the active side. It's the going forward side. It's the side that's progressing into the future. So red shape is going somewhere. And just the positioning on the page tells us that. So where's red shape going? Here we see an example of placement as a visual rhetorical tool. This composition puts our little red shape into a mix of angular, upright, rectangular shapes. We might be able to recognize that we're seeing Little Red Riding Hood in the woods, given our context. But even if we've only recognized the shapes so far, we understand that our red triangle is in the midst of these darker shapes. They surround it. Proportion is another tool that we can use in a very similar scene. Here we've shrunk our triangle down. This environment begins to feel more threatening, or at least more surrounding. Here we've manipulated distance. Now we have our red shape almost at the left margin, although it's cut off by this large dark rectangle. And that, because of the way perspective works, that places this shape further away from us. We've been moved back. If we're looking through a camera lens, we've zoomed way out. So since she's equidistant from the top and bottom, we don't know if she's coming toward us or going away from us, because remember, equilateral triangles we do not perceive as having a facing direction. And there's a great deal of distance between this image's subject and us, the viewer. Diagonal shapes add tension. Suddenly, our little triangle is enclosed. There's something much more threatening about this image and much more active about it. Diagonals are active and suggest relationship and movement. Also, this is mostly an art thing. Diagonals, you never want to run corner to corner. You run straight out the corner of the image because it pulls your eye out. Notice here, our corner diagonal shuts you into the image and directs your eye back toward the relationship between these dark angular shapes and little red triangle. Now we've added a new element. We've taken the distance between us and the little red triangle, and we've placed something much closer to us. It's almost as though we've zoomed back out. In this case, the long angles here definitely do have a facing direction. They're pointy and diagonal, indicating tension, and they lead our eye again back to our triangle. Now we add something a little more threatening: the asymmetry of these triangles. At this point, you might be starting to see them as definitely, literally visually representing teeth. Even if not, though, the asymmetry, the jaggedness feels a little threatening. Again, we're playing with tension, we're playing with placement. Several things are going on here, and that asymmetry gives us a very threatening figure. Now we duplicate in order to draw attention across the image. Now we understand, again, relationship between the little red triangle that's right where it's been and the little red triangle that is in the wolf's eye. However, this is a place where we see something not very rhetorically effective. The triangle just looks kind of derpy on the eye. It's not powerful. It's almost friendly. And remember, equilateral triangle, it doesn't have a facing direction. That's better. Now, the broader part of the shape and the point are both taking us in a direction back toward our little red triangle. The color relationship remains, but we've got a much more persuasive image here in that we understand what's now recognizable as the wolf is looking at, but there's a much more tense form being used. Now we begin to play with framing. In this case, we're using what in photography we would call cropping. The tongue that's lolling out of our wolf's mouth here, and we definitely are recognizing this as an animal now, is directing our eye back in. We have been placed way closer to the wolf than to Little Red, which we're probably not going to literally ask the question of, wait, who am I in this scene? Whose eyes am I looking through? But internally, psychologically, we're starting to get a little uncomfortable with our placement relative to the threatening figure and the easy to map onto every triangle. Also, notice the tongue cuts off in the bottom of the image. That way it's of technically infinite length, as far as we know. We also can't tell if the wolf is drooling. It might look friendly if we could see all of the tongue. And, of course, if the eye wasn't in this very tension-inducing, lengthy shape. Now we're using another color again. Now, this is the same blurple that was used for the mother shape several pages ago, but contextualized by these super angular, tense shapes, by our asymmetrical triangles, by the vibrating contrast between its near complement of this bright red and the moody, soft purple blue. Now we're getting twilight and darkness and maybe mist and threat from this color instead of the gentleness that we got earlier. Context matters when it comes to color. We can also introduce high contrast. Now we've introduced one more color. We've added some white back on the teeth. Now, because of their asymmetry, because of the framing that puts them in the bottom center, and because of that really sharp black and white contrast, the teeth and the danger they represent are the focus of this image. All the images here come from, picture this, as I mentioned, by Molly Bang, but this is the 1991 edition. I'm given to understand the more recent edition has very different pictures, but I prefer these. And hopefully this will lead you to look at familiar pictures and begin to understand the way that the artist, photographer, compositor, whatever, has composed the image in order to make an effective rhetorical appeal. Or perhaps you'll begin to understand why certain images are not effective in conveying their rhetorical message. So have a good day. Don't be eaten by wolves.